Hi, my name is Jeff H. Sipe and I have over 10 years of recruiting experience, including 5 years at Google. In this video, I'm going to cover the best framework for answering open-ended, situational, and scenario-based questions. And stay tuned till the end where I'm going to provide a sample answer. If you like my content, please like. If you have any comments, please comment below. And if you like my overall content, please subscribe. 2 items to keep in mind before we dive in. This is over the top. So maybe this strategy isn't for everybody, but if you make real connections with your interviewers, you're going to have fantastic success. Secondly, know your audience. If your interviewer is not connecting to this strategy, they look like they're getting frustrated and or annoyed, switch it up, maybe dial it back a little bit. I still want you to use this strategy, but you just have to adapt your audience. So let's dive in. Item 1, restate the question. This step instantly gets your brain working on the solution. You are giving your brain direction by organizing the information. And by restating the question, you're really clarifying that you're answering the right question. Now, most of the time, your interviewer is just going to acknowledge that you've restated the question, but sometimes your interviewer might give you a little bit of additional detail depending on how you restate. So you might want to restate it in a little bit different way. My clients do this all the time, and what ends up happening is I end up giving them more information, and it's always unintentional, but they get more info and they do better with their answers. Item 2, follow up and clarifying questions. Yes, we have talked a lot about this. Same as restating the question, follow-up questions and clarifying questions are just going to get your brain working in the right direction. Secondly, follow-up questions, clarifying questions, they show thought process. And lastly, these questions might actually be thought-provoking enough that they have your interviewer change directions or have more specificity in the direction that you take in your answer. This section is definitely about asking questions, but it's also about brainstorming and showing thought process. Item 3, brainstorm and organize. You've asked your clarifying questions, follow-up questions, you've restated the question. Tell your interviewer, I'd like to take a minute to think about it. You are not asking, you are telling. This is a critical step for having success. Remember, the biggest fire drill in any organization, they're going to take some time to think about, okay, what's the best steps? What's the path forward we want to take? And does it seem crazy to take a minute or two to organize your thoughts with this additional information if you received any? Yeah, it probably does, but the best interviewers do it. And believe it or not, your answer will likely be shorter. Because you've organized your thoughts, you won't get long-winded, you won't drift, you won't get off topic. So dig in a little deeper. And yes, for the commonly asked questions, I absolutely want you to come in with a plan. So if you get one of those questions, still take a moment to collect your thoughts and make sure you're really answering their specific question. Item 4 is an overview with questions. After you take your time, you present a high-level plan. And specifically, this answer is probably going to fall somewhere in the 15 to 30-second range. And then you stop, whether you've given 5 steps, 7 steps, 10 steps, and you ask your interviewer, of those 10 steps, would you like me to go into any more detail on any of those steps? The likely response is no, but this is where a great candidate realizes that interviews aren't static. We really, really need to pause on this item. Remember, when you walk into these interviews, you don't know what's been going on with the candidate pool, what's going on with the hiring team, the hiring manager, what's going on internally in the organization. So any one of your steps could potentially be really impactful and something they want to hear. So presenting an answer that assumes you know what they want to hear is not as smart as asking them what they want to hear, because sometimes they'll tell you. Item 5 is answer and solve. So now that you're ready to solve, expand on these number of steps in a logical and more detailed methodology. Remember to back up each one of these steps talking about the question and specifically themes of the question and words that are used in the question. Item 6, more questions. Yes, how many more questions can we actually ask? you can ask more. And at the end of these types of very open-ended questions, what I like to do is I like to ask 4 more, 3 specific and then 1 generic. And so yes, if you had a plan, you want these questions pre-planned. But the other area that's going to be really important is if you fumbled or you just missed a point that you forgot to talk about, you can introduce that at the end with follow-up questions at the end of your answer. So let's dive into the example answer. In this answer, I'm definitely going to take the tougher path. So I am making the assumption that Jane is not answering a single one of my follow-up questions. She's not changing anything up. So that will be the path we take. Jeff, how do you determine the complexity of a program? Jane, great question. Okay, you would like me to outline how I determine the complexity of a program. So you can notice I added additional word in the restating just to see if Jane will switch it up. She doesn't. Jane, I have a few follow-up questions, and then you just instantly start firing away. Again, you don't ask, is this a completely new program or an already existing program? Then stop. After the first question, you really want to pause to see if Jane's going to play along or if Jane is just not going to answer any of your questions. Again, that's kind of common. So then I would ask, is this a domestic or global program? Is this a technical project or a business-focused project? What specific teams will I be working with? Is this going to involve only internal teams? Will this involve some external partnerships as well? And actually, as we think about this program, is it internal facing or is it external facing with customers? Is it urgent? What is the major outcome or goal we're trying to achieve, etc. And if I were in this interview, I would ask more follow-up questions, but for brevity, let's keep it shorter. Jane, I'd like to take a minute to collect and organize my thoughts. Now, if your interviewer ever said no, I'd like you to dive right in. Dive right in. Take that direction, but you'd want to keep in the back of your mind, do I want to work for a company that doesn't allow me to organize my thoughts before answering questions? Think about the application of what this might look like on the job. So once you've organized your thoughts, dive in with the high-level plan. Jane, I would like to determine the complexity of a program by taking 10 steps. First, what is the goal or outcome we're trying to achieve? That's always where I want to start. Secondly, I obviously want to utilize past people, data, and documentation. Third, I would want to research and gather any additional data. Then I would want to, fourth, determine scope, scale, and impact. Fifth, look at budget and timeline. Sixth, determine available and stretch resources. 7, examine risk. 8, determine stakeholders and collaborative partners. 9, meet with those people. 10, plan and create documentation working on a shared vision with a shared outcome and shared goals. Now, Jane, based on this outline, are there any specific steps you would like me to go into in greater detail? Let's say Jane responds no. Now you go more in depth. For each of these 10 items, you will likely have 2 to 3 talking points, probably. All right, Jane, let me dive in a little bit deeper. So what is the goal or outcome we are trying to achieve? That's the first step. I always like to start backwards. I definitely like to have that loose mental plan. And what this does is it allows me to determine complexity with limited information. So I just want to get the framework, start working on it in my mind. Second, utilizing past people, data, and documentation. I think that this is so paramount, so critical. I start with the people. So I would go talk to them. What went well? What went wrong? What do I need to know? And how complex do you think this program is? And in terms of data and documentation, I want to know about the availability of these items and what the past owner or owners recommends I start with. 3, I want to research and gather any additional data. So that's new trends, that is actual new data, and that's new technology and tools. And depending on what's out there, that could make the program more complex or less complex, especially if the tech and tools have gotten better. Maybe it makes it a little bit easier for me and the team. 4, I want to determine scope, scale, and impact. And so I'm going to work with a framework. I'm going to look at success metrics, and I want to see how it impacts the organization, not only now, but in the future. if this is going to be a program that builds into the future of the organization, it's definitely going to help me determine the complexity level. 5, budget and timeline, pretty common items. Budget, I'm looking at primary, secondary, and tertiary costs. I'm also looking from a timeline perspective at tasks, dependencies, and milestones. The more complex, the more budget and time I might need. So 6, determine available and stretch resources. So I'm going to look at my work breakdown structure. I'm going to look at people. I'm going to look at tools. And then again, I'm going to reflect back to budget and timeline. Not only the what, but the availability of these resources will determine complexity. 7, I'm going to examine risk. So I'm going to be determining, planning, and ultimately mitigating risk. More risk doesn't always mean more complex, but we need to explore this item. 8, I definitely want to determine stakeholders and collaborative partners. This could be technical people. This could be people on the business side. It could be people in like roles, like other program managers, product managers, project managers. It could be people in cross-functional roles. It could be subject matter experts, etc. Number of people will definitely impact complexity. 9, I want to meet with these people. First of all, the critical stakeholders, and then the larger team. We're going to ask a lot of questions. We're going to do a lot of whiteboarding. It's really, really going to be critical to meet with these people to determine next steps. Step 10, and the last one, is obviously we want to create documentation with the plan that we've created for our shared vision and goals. And so we have to get everybody to buy in and agree to this plan, make sure that looking at this resource is available to everybody, and this outline will really help us determine complexity. Jane, I know I kind of rushed through some of these items and kept it pretty high level because it's a really complex question. And I'm happy to go into more detail on success metrics, for instance, as we talk about scope and scale. That's an important one. I definitely breezed through risk. And so we could talk a little bit more about risk mitigation. When I think about complexity of a project, I definitely think about SMEs. So we can get a little bit more into that as well. Is there any area or item that you want me to cover in greater detail? Again, let's assume Jane doesn't answer any of these questions. You've at least set yourself up for success, and you've recognized, hey, here's some areas where maybe I didn't go into enough detail. And if Jane really wants to hear more about those areas, she'll ask. Disclaimer, I'm not a program manager, but this is how I would answer this question and tackle this question. I really hope this video helps. This is a lot when you think about answering a question, but it creates a really good back and forth. You're not in a static environment, and therefore it just upticks your opportunity to have great success with these types of questions. Good luck. Thanks so much.